Hello and welcome to Erik Harrison, a podcast hosted by yours truly, writer, actor, avant-garde dentist, Erik Harrison. We have an unusual show for you today, but before that, let's get to the theme song. And you may find yourself living in a shotgun shack, and you may find yourself in another part of the world, and you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile. And you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? I have struggled with today's show a little bit. I struggle with all of them, to be honest. I don't plan, and that makes it harder, which is an obvious truth that once said out loud makes me feel extremely stupid. However, some things have been on my mind, which have interfered with the ability to approach this ridiculous exercise with the usual amount of mania, if not joy. We will get to the usuals. We'll have a recurring segment, a brief history of farts that we do every episode, and of course we're going to make fun of enemy of the show, Leand and Verno. But traditionally before that, we've talked about previous business, which has been mostly, there are those sirens again, letting you know that this is of course recorded stupidly in my bedroom directly into a computer microphone with no preparation whatsoever. It's the sirens that really give the whole exercise its fundamental authenticity. Previous business has usually meant the matter of the shirts, as it were, and none of those are mailed out for reasons that will become momentarily obvious, and my health. Today is the 9th of January. It has been 9 days since the beginning of the new year, and it is 9 days till my birthday. And this particular stretch of time is always fraught with really self-indulgent contemplation and inward looking. It's not healthy, it's not pleasant. It's also not unusual, and you'd think I'd be used to it at this point. But over the last week or so, as much of the world felt, if not on the brink of destruction, then certainly one big step closer to it, I found myself afraid not of dying, but of living. I presume most of the people listening to this know me. This is, of course, presented as a podcast intended for a wide audience, but in effect, it is an inside joke between me and the maybe 100 people who know me well enough to listen to the stupid thing. And so my story is not something that should surprise many people. It's not that unusual anyway. I grew up in a small town. All I wanted to do once I discovered it was act and perform for other people. I turned 18. I went to college. I did none of that for 10 years of my life. I got married. I got a job. I got divorced. I got lost. And then through a series of strange coincidences, wound up with some friends in DC, far away from where I grew up, and discovered, quite by accident, performing again. And it has become the only thing I want to do. And the time that I spent not doing it has given me a clarity of purpose that I think I would not otherwise possess. One of the things that constantly strikes me is how many of my peers are younger than me, how many of them took a left when I took a right and stayed on the path of making art, and how gifted many of them are, in addition to how skilled, those are two separate things. So they all have 10 years of training on me, and more talent than myself. And it is beyond cliche to be a 38-year-old man nearing his birthday and thinking about time lost and envious of those younger than you. And the modern version of that cliche, of course, is some asshole with a podcast. So I'm well aware of how this looks, and not even looks, but in fact is. But starting at the beginning of the year, or a little before the beginning of the year, I became very sick. And I'm mostly better now, and there are still questions about my health. But I'm up and about, and generally living my life just as I did before I got sick. But in the darkest hours, while lying in bed, not able to stand, not able to walk, not able to move my head, all I could think about is, what if it's like this forever? That siren is so on the nose that I wish that I was writing this so I could not do something that cheap in terms of background noise. Really, that's elevating to text what should remain subtext. God, please cut back. I wasn't scared of being sick enough that something serious might happen. I was scared of being sick enough that I couldn't go up on stage anymore. That I couldn't stand and walk around and play all of the people that I want to play. It terrified me, and it also seemed small and shallow and stupid. I have a very good life, above and beyond the opportunities I have to perform and to make art, and I would miss it a great deal. But the thing that scared me was losing the thing that I willingly gave up 20 years ago when I turned 18. And that made me feel small. The world is on fire in the big, grand scheme of things. And the lives of many people close to me are also, if not on fire, then smoldering. People facing traumas and dangers far greater than the ones that I face. And to realize that the important thing in my life is not fixing the world or caring for my friends or living the absolutely objectively decent life that I have, but just whether or not I could get on a stage and gallivant in front of people in silly clothing and make funny voices. It made me feel inadequate to the task of our era and of my life. Yet it was nevertheless true. And now that I'm out of it, now that I'm well enough to perform, to work, to record this stupid podcast, I could pretty much ignore those feelings and go about my day, but it may be self-serving and self-justifying, but I was forced to think about why I wanted to do it, why I needed to do it, and what value making art, including, yes, this is art. It's bad art, but it's art. Why that was important to me, and if it was justifiable. And I always turn to the idea that I want to make people laugh. There's some value in making people laugh, and I believe both of those things. But it's obviously not the only thing I want to do. I'm going to be in a Tennessee Williams play in a month and a half, and I'm not in that thing to make anybody laugh. Someone might laugh, but that's not the intention. And while trying to stand long enough to take a shower for the first time, not that long ago, I had this thought that was sad and pathetic and self-loathing and self-indulgent, that I just wanted someone to recognize what pain I was in that moment. Even though, again, my pain felt very small. And then I thought of all of my friends who are in pain, who are suffering, who are being valiant or not so valiant in the face of something awful. And I thought about the world on fire. And I thought, I bet all of those people want to be seen too. And every time I've played a character, it was some combination of trying to make the audience forget who they were and what was going wrong in their life, and some combination of wanting them to be seen and to see the character I was playing. And I realized, good or bad, that is my rationale for doing what I do. I want my loved ones to see themselves and to feel seen, to be acknowledged in the world. Even if it doesn't make anything better, at least it is acknowledged. And if I can't do that, I want to make them laugh. And ridiculously, while wobbling in a shower, which is a terrible place to have vertigo for obvious reasons. First off, it's very embarrassing if you fall down and you're also naked and wet. But also, try balancing when everything is slippery. However ridiculous, that realization made me feel better. And it made me feel less like there was any urgency. That I would find some way to do those things, no matter how old I was, no matter how bad or good at it I was, no matter how young everyone else was, even if I was hobbled in bed. And in that small way, I found some purpose. And if I tab over, I can see I've been talking like this for 12 minutes. There's no way that was entertaining or especially insightful to hear the existential musings of a middle-aged white guy. So, instead, we will move to our second segment. What did I say it was going to be? A history of farts. The first fart was made by Grog, a caveman, and was heard by Magog, his brother, and Grog pointed and blamed it on a nearby dinosaur, thus establishing a pattern that would endure for the rest of humanity. Interestingly enough, the second fart happened the next day. It was the same thing, and Magog didn't believe Grog, and so Grog killed him. After that, there were no more important farts. That is the end of farts in history. We should go to a sponsor break. So we've been talking for a while. Our sponsor this week is something a little special, and I will just go ahead and read this copy our sponsor has sent in. So, thank you, sponsor. Yes, we have a sponsor. It's very exciting. Hello, listeners of Erik Harrison, the podcast, a podcast by Erik Harrison. This message is brought to you by Leanne Inverno. She's not promoting any business or production, but is sponsoring today's episode to set the record straight. Erik has proclaimed her the enemy of the podcast, but in reality, isn't she the victim of the podcast? All Leanne is guilty of is trying to be a good friend. She was called out of the blue by Erik, and when bombarded with, "You're on my podcast right now," did she object? Did she hang up? No. She yes-anded and went along for the ride. For the second episode, Leanne spent the day worried about her friend's health problems, only to find that she had missed a call from him and was left with a voicemail that said, "Leanne, I'm dying, Leanne, and you're killing me by not picking up the phone." In a panic, she returns the call, only for Erik not to answer. She feared things had gone downhill, only to be later sent a link to a YouTube post of episode 2, in which Erik then declared her the enemy. Later, he even used her status as the enemy to temper his girlfriend's anger at him. Actually, she's not mad about that and thinks it was definitely the right call. Leanne was called once again, this time for episode 3. It was made clear that this was because of the unavailability of the obviously superior Stacy Crummell. Leanne again yes-handed and role-played as Stacy, only for Erik to push her innocent answers to dangerous territory and then hang up. Now this, listeners, is the truth. Erik Harrison is an unreliable narrator. He is the antagonist of his own podcast. This message has been brought to you by Leanne Inverno, and we just want to thank the sponsors of this show for their time and attention. You can sponsor the podcast by sending me money. Just figure out how much my time is worth, and then send me that much. And then I will say whatever you ask me to say on the podcast within a pretty wide parameter for reason. No editing of your content, no changing of words, perhaps a funny voice, but I think it only adds to the text that you send as a sponsor. In completely unrelated news that has nothing to do with that, I have discovered that Leanne Inverno is the primary cause of climate change. Did you know that? I didn't, but I discovered it on Wikipedia. Wikipedia, the global warming article, which says, and let me just pull it up here so that I can quote it exactly. Let's just go global warming Wikipedia. Global warming is a long-term rise in the average temperature of the Earth's climate system and is caused by enemy of the podcast, Leanne Inverno. I am reading the global warming article directly from Wikipedia. It is quite possible that after this podcast ends, we will discover that Leanne has caused other problems in the world, and that Wikipedia, a publicly editable source, cites these things as fact. We may even discover, if you follow me on Twitter at Erik, E-R-I-K Harrison, a list of links that you yourself can update with information about all of the awful things Leanne Inverno has done. I'd love to call enemy of the podcast Leanne Inverno and discuss all of the horrible, horrible things she's done, but we're out of time. So thank you for joining us, listening to a really ridiculous rant by me, not rant, bearing of the heart, which was unprompted and undeserved and unwanted, as well as listening to our sponsor break, the money-grubbing hands that drive Erik Harrison the podcast. Appreciate you. And I guess that just means that we should close with this theme song. Time isn't holding us. Time isn't after us. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was.